The idea of free primary school education for poor children in Africa sounds like a no-brainer, in a similar category to motherhood and apple pie. The British government has given £20 million to fund state schools in Kenya. But are they the best way to educate children in the developing world? Well, Professor James Tooley of Newcastle University has carried out research in Kenya and Nigeria. He's concluded that private schools outperform government ones at a fraction of the cost. Here's his report from Lagos.
This is Makoko, a typical slum right on the edge of Lagos. I made my first trip here a couple of years ago to what some call the Venice of Africa. I was pretty sure this place, like many other slums around the world, had a rather interesting secret. This is an extraordinary place. Half the population live on houses like this, built on stilts, sunk into the Lagos Lagoon. It's one of the poorest shanties in Africa, home to about 50,000 people. It really is one of the last places you'd expect to find private education. But that is precisely what I found. A vibrant system of private schools. Here's a concert at one of the 32 I found in Makoko. What my research shows is that in these areas, about 70% of children are going to private schools. That's the vast majority. Governments assume they have slipped through the net. But they haven't. They're here and they are getting an education. And that has huge significance for universal basic education.
Welcome to you, Honorable BBC. Welcome to Texas, Honorable BBC.
But it costs money. Average income here is about $50 a month. School fees could cost $5 or $6. I asked the parents why pay when the state system is free.
Going to the public school here in Nigeria, particularly in this Lagos state, is just like, say, wasting the time of the children because they don't teach them anything.
The public school, the people, they are many. They're not teaching well. All primary school, after they don't know anything. That's why I put my children in my private school.
The difference is clear. The private school and the children of private school and the children of public school, the difference is so great that the children of private school can speak very well. They know what they are doing. But there, the public, the children were abandoned.
So there you have it. Parents have told us precisely why these private schools exist. But the next question is, how good are they? What is the quality of education in schools like this? Well, it depends who you listen to. The woman in charge of education in Makoko certainly didn't mince her words about why parents used private schools.
There are many reasons. No information, ignoramuses. They don't have the information that the public schools are free. Some of them, they chose private schools because they are near their homes. But the most important point is fake status symbol. In quotes, fake status symbol. They want to be seen as rich parents, caring parents, who take their children to fee-paying schools, supposedly better, which are very poor in facilities, usually, because there's no way you can compare these poor, ill-equipped private schools with government schools, where all the teachers are qualified, very qualified.
Makoko has 3 state schools, all on the same site. Easy for administrators, not so good for the children. And the teachers?
Comb. Soap. Telephone. Lamp. Table fan. Hello? Daniel. Hello, who is that? on the line. Is that Baba Timishe? Ah, a wrong number.
The Commissioner of Education for Lagos, an Oxford-educated professor, told me that in the past, parents might have been right. State schools were not so good. But that's all changed.
Now, collect the drinks. And to make sure the bag was ready.
The teachers were not well motivated because of the challenges attached to their conditions of service. At times you had haphazard payment of salaries. At times outright non-payment for some. However, in the last 6 years, things have changed considerably. This public school is very good now. You have well-trained manpower.
It's all so different in the private schools.
We are talking about you, but if you say we are discussing about you, you are wrong. Because discuss means talk about.
Teachers there may only get a quarter of the wages, but they're from the slum communities themselves. They're committed, and they get better results.
He will surely return back.
This is a book. This is a book.
In the research, we tested a random sample of well over 3,000 children in state and private schools. The private school children outperformed the state children in every subject. In maths, the state schools got an average of 41%, and in private schools, it was 56%. In English, the state schools got 42%, in the private, it was 65%. Clearly, these schools are much better, but that's not how Mary sees it.
So these poorly ill-equipped, unapprovable private schools, mushroom schools, they are causing a lot of damage. A lot of damage. At the end of the day, the children come out half-baked. They are not useful to themselves. They end up in occupations that parents are doing. They don't progress further. So that's 2 generations, 3 generations wasted.
What really puzzles me is why everyone, governments, international agencies, academics, they all ignore the significance of these schools. In this area, 70% of school children go to private school. These schools are better, much better than the government alternative, and they perform better at less than a quarter of the cost. So why is everyone in denial? What I have uncovered is that the global education crisis has been exaggerated. Education for all is going to be much easier to achieve than people think, because the private sector is already taking us in that direction. And that, surely, is something to be celebrated.
Well, I'm joined now by the author of that report, Professor James Tooley from Newcastle University, and also by Keith Lewin, who's Professor of Education at the University of Sussex. The research and the filming we saw there, Keith Lewin, suggested that private schools not only offer higher standards, but at a fraction of the cost. Aren't they the way ahead?
No, I don't think so, for several reasons. I think the film we have just seen asks the right kind of questions, but it doesn't produce the right answers. There are several reasons for that. First of all, in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, there are about 30 million, possibly even 40 million children who either don't go to primary school or who've started attending and failed to complete. Those children are poor. They come from households which live in less than $1 a day poverty. We know very well that the direct costs of schooling, that is paying fees to go to school, are associated with attendance. We know also that distance is associated with attendance. Children don't go to schools which aren't local. The provider of last resort for those children is always going to be the state because of their level of poverty and because it includes, in some countries, 20 or 25% of children who are HIV orphans.
OK, well, let's hear James Tooley's response to that particular point, which is in a way that private schools are just working at the margins. For the bulk of these children with families on such a low income, under $1 a day, they can't really help them.
That's not what we found, is it? The film you saw said in that area of Makoko, a very poor area, no one will deny this, a lot of people living on $1 a day or lower, 70% of the children are going to private school. They're not schools of last resort, they're schools, as the parents say, they're schools of first resort. That's where they choose to send their children, and if they can't get get places there, then they'll go to the state schools. But the interesting thing about what Keith has just mentioned, about orphans, a lot of these schools give free places to orphans. So they're commercial concerns, but they also give 10, 15% of their places free, particularly to orphans.
OK, but why would parents on such a low income, why would they scrape together the money to send their children to private schools if they didn't feel that they were getting value for their money?
I think what you're seeing there is a kind of tragedy because it's an example of state failure. Those people live in Lagos, in and around Lagos. Lagos actually has about probably 30% of the GDP of Nigeria. Though those people are poor, they're not nearly as poor as people in rural areas in the rest of Nigeria. Of course, it may be true that people are making a choice in the absence of an alternative to attend those schools, but it shouldn't be that way, and it's no way forward in the long term.
Improve the state schools, there'd be no need for private schools.
I just don't get this attitude that Keith's portraying and everyone else is portraying. It's this dog-in-a-manger attitude. Where is this ideological objection to private education come from? There wasn't this objection in the past. In Kenya, part of the liberation struggle was private schools. Kenyatta, he was the president of the Kikuyu Private Schools Association, which was banned by the British, which was part of the liberation struggle. I see these children in the school, these parents using these schools as part of a new liberation struggle against the incompetent state, and it should be celebrated. As I say, there's no need for this dog-in-a-manger attitude. It's not state failure, it's market success. Let's celebrate it.
James's hostility to states is well known. We gave up, I think, thinking that the problems of mass access to primary schooling for the poor were ones which the private sector would solve in the 1870s in England. No modern state which has mass access to primary schooling goes down the route of primarily private fee-paying provision. There are many obvious reasons for that. It's not that the private sector doesn't have a role to play, of course it does, but it will never be the provider of last resort to the poor and the ultra-poor.
It can never be the main provider.
Well, I think what Keith is doing is saying we did it a certain way. If he's right, I don't think he is, but we did it a certain way, so therefore Africa must do it the same way. That's called imperialism, isn't it? And so Bob Geldof had a very good point. He said, let's find the appropriate ways. Development works sometimes when people ignore the experts and find their own culturally appropriate models. That's what they're doing in Makoko, and that's what Keith should be listening to. Let's ignore what he said.
Is there a risk that Western aid could actually be harmful in this, that by putting a lot of money into the state education, forcing good private schools to close?
I don't think so at all. I think the fallacy that we've just heard is one which really invites the withdrawal of the state from providing basic public services.
The system whether in 70% of parents who privatise themselves. The state has withdrawn.
This is absolutely untrue.
They don't want the state.
This is absolutely untrue. If you look at entrance to primary school leaving examinations across Africa, you will not find, in most cases, more than 10% of people coming from private schools.
So, James Tudor, what's your answer to the way ahead? Is it stop funding state schools, let private schools bear the whole of the burden? That's unrealistic, surely.
Why is it unrealistic? Why is it unrealistic to say these schools, now serving 70% of the population in very poor areas, are the way forward? We can
not have state schools in Africa, that's what you're suggesting.
Let's not even go that far. Let's say the people are privatising themselves. Let's say the aid agency should listen to them, not listen to Keith. They should listen to the people and say, OK, let's provide vouchers. Let's provide loan schemes for these children.
And final answer to Keith.
Yeah, I think this kind of philanthropy of poverty is rather quaint, and it's not shared by most of my African colleagues, and it's not what I see when I go and visit poor rural areas. What you're advocating is the withdrawal of the state. If you are right, James, then we need do nothing. The private sector will solve this problem.
This is great success story.
It has had 50 years to do this. Manifestly, it's not succeeded.
Keith Lewin, James Tooley, thank you both. We'll leave it there.